Creatives fail. The really good ones fail often. Stephen Kotler, The Flow Research Project. This is part 4 of our series on creativity. Welcome back to Better Humanhood. We are brought to you today by Kettle and Fire. They make bone broth, they make soups, they want you to recover from your injuries, from your workouts. They want you to eat healthier, to have a delicious base for your body. You can use their bone broth to cook soups, cook rice, whatever you want, or do it like me, just open the box, pour it into a cup, heat it up, and drink it like tea. Get 10% off. Go to kettleandfire.com. Use code BetterHumanhood at checkout. It's kettleandfire.com. Use code BetterHumanhood at checkout for 10% off. And let's do the show.
Welcome to Better Humanhood, where we build a better world by building better people. We have to live on the planet, and we have to live with other people. We have conversations about making that a wonderful proposition.
This is the last of our series of creativity. We will be returning to the topic, but this is the last technical edition in a row. And it'll be largely a prescriptive episode, generally imparting the prescriptions of others. The shortest version I can give you is this. 1, meditate. 2, do the work. Just about everyone who generates prescriptions for creativity includes some version of get some alone time, get out in nature, or spend some time in silence. Just about everyone says you have to show up and do creative work for creativity to really shine through. Before we get too deep, hope you're just having a wonderful day. That's all I'm asking of you. I hope that you're enjoying this moment wherever you are, whether you're just sitting at home listening, you're on a treadmill, you're walking, running, getting the house cleaned up, sitting in the woods, driving to work, wherever you are, at work. I don't know. Maybe you're one of those crazy people who hangs from the top of cell phone towers and then climbs back down. Maybe you're doing that right now. I don't have that gene. Whatever you're doing, I hope you're doing it well. Now, back to it. There is one concept I will attempt to explain briefly without getting as deep as some of the sources will. The concept is flow. If you've ever leveled up in your coding or writing or work or some athletic endeavor, perhaps not even noticing that hours and hours have passed, you've been in flow. The technical term for flow is transient hypofrontality. That is, your frontal cortex goes into overdrive for a short period of time. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, we mentioned him in both parts 2 and 3 of this series, did the seminal work on flow in the 1970s and managed to codify it in a 1990 book. The punchline is that flow creates optimal performance and, in turn, happiness and fulfillment. Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist, and his research has generally leaned that way in the psychology and neuroscience of things, looking at how flow manifests, some of the things that can regularly get you into flow, like something you enjoy that is somewhat but not too challenging. Journalist Stephen Kotler has largely become the how to get into flow and what to do with it guy. He discovered, quote unquote, flow after having been in bed for years, recovering from Lyme disease and getting dragged out surfing. He went to figure out why surfing made him feel better, and he learned about flow. He has since started and then departed the Flow Genome Project, and he's also started the Flow Research Collective, and among his books are 2 focusing on flow, one on extreme athletes called The Rise of Superman, and one on teams in the military, one on teams from from the military to companies and even to individual experience. That was called Stealing Fire, which is co-written with Jamie Wheal, who founded the Flow Genome Project with him, and Jamie is still running the Flow Genome Project. Stephen Kotler has since designed his life around Flow and teaches others to do the same. In the second installment of this series on creativity, we mentioned that we would discuss specialization versus generalization in this part. I think this is a good time for that. The obvious argument for specialization is that you can't become the best at very many things. The obvious argument against it, though, is that if the thing you're the best at becomes obsolete, you either have to create a new niche for the thing you're already good at or scrap it and start over. Meanwhile, it's difficult to get even very good at a lot of things, but you can get pretty good at several, and innovation often comes from combining disciplines, something James Altucher calls idea sex. On top of that, if you know enough about several things, you can hire specialists in those things to combine their expertise. As more and more fields become available, it does get more difficult to learn more things. Csikszentmihalyi writes, sometime after Leonardo da Vinci, it became impossible to learn enough about all the arts and sciences to be an expert in more than a small fraction of them. Domains have split into subdomains, and a mathematician who has mastered algebra may not know much about number theory, combinatorics, topology, and vice versa, whereas in the past an artist typically painted, sculpted, cast gold, and designed buildings. Now all of these special skills tend to be acquired by different people. In other words, we don't tend to do it all anymore. Maybe we get good at one thing and then pretty good at a couple of adjacent things, but rarely are we an expert in a lot of things at once. There are, of course, polymaths in the world still. Polymaths being people who are good at a bunch of different things. You might not put very many of today's standouts in the same league as Leonardo or even a Ben Franklin, but when you consider someone like Richard Branson or Elon Musk, there are still some of them hanging around. If you take the learn a bunch about a bunch of stuff and then hire specialists route, Buckminster Fuller has some reflection. The people who commanded ships and understood trade routes and knew where to get what and really held the puppet strings of kings and tribal leaders, Fuller calls these great pirates. They stayed afloat, Fuller asserts in Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, thanks to their comprehensive capabilities and by hiring people who weren't smart enough to see the whole picture, that is, specialists without a worldview. But these great pirates got cocky and they didn't keep up with new discoveries in the world. They didn't know anything about electromagnetics, and when World War I ended, they had to give up their positions. You have to keep up, or you don't get to stay on top of the food chain. For most of human history, Csikszentmihalyi writes, only gods were creative. Every religion has an origin myth. Someone or something creates the universe, world, people, animals, etc. Well, people are just trying to live. Hunting, gathering, trying not to get eaten by tigers, trying not to die of disease. Only in the past few thousand years do we get to do creative things like writing and art and invention. So we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Elchanan Goldberg writes that information and processes change really fast these days, and when that happens, everyone becomes involved in the creative process, or at least has the opportunity to do so. If you post a photo to Facebook, guess what? You're a published artist. Goldberg predicts that within a few generations, or maybe even just one, the blurring of boundaries between the physical and virtual worlds will be nearly complete. That will have implications for the way the brain functions. The rapidly accelerating novelty curve, he writes, will have a profound impact on our minds and brains by forcing every one of us to be a consumer of innovation to an unprecedented degree. And understanding the impact this constant exposure to novelty will have on the consumer brain is a challenge facing neuroscience. And we're not even going to get into deep fakes and voice skins and avatars and augmented reality. Some exciting stuff in the creative realm, but also kind of the reality realm coming our way in our lifetimes. But before we get into prescriptions and doing the work, we're going to do that momentarily. I want to roll things back to our discussion of flow and dig a little deeper. First off, it should be noted that flow is a work state. We might feel happy after a flow session, but we might also be drained. When we are in flow, writes Csikszentmihalyi, we do not usually feel happy for the simple reason that in flow, we feel only what is relevant to the activity. Happiness is a distraction. It is only after we get out of flow at the end of a session or in moments of distraction within it that we might indulge in feeling happy. Here are the 9 aspects of the flow experience. There are clear steps, clear goals every step of the way. You get immediate feedback. Like if you're playing music, does a note sound right? If you're drawing, does a line reach where you want it to and curve the way you want it to? There's a balance between skill and challenge. When your skill level is too high for your task, we're bored. If the task is too challenging, we're overwhelmed. You concentrate, and by concentration, we're talking about a merger of action and awareness. So you have an idea of what's going on within your task, and you're taking action within it. We don't notice distractions in a flow state. And while in flow, we are too involved to be concerned with failure. Some people describe it as a feeling of total control, but we actually aren't in control. It's just that the issue doesn't come up. Often you won't know whether you succeeded or failed at your task until you're done with your flow state. And you come up and you get to look at what you worked on. And as we mentioned last week, one of the things that creative people are is objective. That they get into it, but then they can take a step back from their own work and take a look at it. See how they did. In a flow state, self-consciousness disappears, time becomes distorted, and the activity becomes autotelic, that is, an end to itself. Most activities are exotelic. We do them to reach a larger goal. An autotelic activity is done for the activity itself. Like if you run to get a runner's high, you're just running. You're not running to get someplace. If you're getting lost in a book for a couple hours, you're just getting lost in the book. You're not taking notes or anything. You're just enjoying all that. Kotler and Wheel push flow a step further into a realm reminiscent of what Plato called ecstasis or ecstasis. Plato described ecstasis as an altered state, they write, where our normal waking consciousness vanishes, completely replaced by an intense euphoria and a powerful connection to a greater intelligence. It really is an altered state, and it's a big money business in the U.S. We spend more money on altered states in America, things like drugs, alcohol, porn, extreme sports, concerts, festival, clubs, upwards of $4 trillion. We spend more money on altered states than we do on maternity care, humanitarian aid, and K-12 public education put together. Kotler and Wheel drill down the feelings we get in ecstasis related to flow to 4 elements: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. They summarize that by their acronym STARE, S-T-E-R. I'm sure you can see the benefits of all these attributes, and if you go over to the related blog post over on joshshear.com, posted yesterday as of the release date of this podcast, I'm sure you can see the benefits of all of these attributes when it comes not only to creativity, but general productivity. And the excitedness you are hearing in the background, it's my daughter Marlena, who is 9 months old as of this recording, and really just about 10 months old by this release date. But we are recording at almost 2 a.m., and she is wide awake and happy. So you know what? We're just going to let her contribute Maybe she will tire herself out. But let's next discuss knowledge in doing work. It is rare, writes Csikszentmihalyi, for a truly creative achievement to come during a light bulb moment. Instead, they usually come after years of hard work and maybe a little luck, but to paraphrase Samuel Goldwyn, the harder people work, the luckier they tend to get. Occasionally, it is possible, Csikszentmihalyi continues, to arrive at a creative discovery without any preparation. Lucky person just stumbles into a wholly unpredictable situation, but usually insights tend to come to prepared minds, that is, to those who have thought long and hard about a given set of problematic issues. There are, of course, innovations that spring from a flash of genius, Peter Drucker writes in an essay. Most innovations, however, especially the successful ones, result from a conscious, purposeful search for innovation opportunities, which are only found in a few situations. Above all, Drucker continues, innovation is work rather than genius. It requires knowledge, it often requires ingenuity, and it requires focus. Well, how much work? How much knowledge? Most creatives across fields, according to Elkanon Goldberg, are subject to a 10-year rule. They need about 10 years of mastery in the existing knowledge of their field before making a truly consequential contribution. There are, of course, exceptions to that. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is. If you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, it's not his 10,000 hours is not his concept, but he often gets misquoted as saying, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you're truly an expert. No, it's true expertise is from 10,000 hours of focused practice. So you and I might pick up a guitar and just strum away for 10,000 hours over the course of a few decades, but if we're not focusing our practice, we're just, strumming away and playing our favorite songs, sing with our kids. That's not focused practice. We're not achieving excellence through that. That's the kind of work you need to do to truly make a contribution to your field. Csikszentmihalyi also writes that you have to know the rules of something before you can break them. For example, a musician has to be able to play an instrument before being able to write a new song in it. Or an inventor must understand aerodynamics and physics before being able to improve on an airplane design. Goldberg also points out that innovation doesn't tend to invent a new area of human endeavor. Rather, creativity builds on a particular body of knowledge, experience, and skills unique to that content area. Of course, sometimes an innovation will create a new branch of knowledge. Think about like Pythagoras' contribution to mathematics, but it grows off an existing tree. It doesn't create something entirely new out of thin air. Further, notes Csikszentmihalyi, to be creative, a person must be curious and deeply interested in a domain, and also have access to it through schools, education, or having enough money to acquire knowledge in the area. A genetic predisposition for a given domain might be important, but sensory advantage isn't required. I mean, think about Beethoven, we talked about last week. He was deaf when he did his best work. El Greco couldn't see. He had vision problems, but he was still a master painter. A sensory advantage may drive interest in a field, though. So if you're particularly good at designing houses, you might be predisposed to innovate in architecture. In his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, Stephen Johnson writes about serendipity and hints at what we earlier referred to as idea sex. Serendipitous discoveries, he writes, often involve exchanges across traditional disciplines. That's something that Csikszentmihalyi echoes. Creativity, he notes, generally involves crossing the boundaries of domain. Serendipity, Johnson continues, needs unlikely collisions and discoveries, but it also needs something to anchor those discoveries. Otherwise, your ideas are the carbon atoms randomly colliding with other atoms in the primordial soup, without ever forming the rings and lattices of organic life. To summarize, innovative people might stumble upon a new branch of study, but it's in an existing field. And by and large, people who make advances in a field or expand the field with a new branch have a very firm grasp on the field, have been working in it for a while, and are generally hard workers. These are the many parts associated with creativity and innovation, and you'll recognize some of these from above. These come from Elchanan Goldberg. Salience is the ability to pose central problems and ask important questions. Novelty is an interest in and the ability to find solutions for problems not tackled before. You need an ability to relate old knowledge to new problems, recognize familiar patterns in seemingly new and unique problems. Remember, we said a few weeks ago, you don't have to know a person to understand that that's a person. We recognize familiar patterns. The problem could be not seen before, but it probably is going to look like something else. Generativity and mental flexibility, the ability to generate multiple and diverse approaches to a problem, is essential to the creative process in science. You need drive and doggedness, an ability to deploy sustained effort toward tackling a problem. You need mental focus, the ability to systematically pursue a logical train of thought, but you also need to allow for mental wandering, kind of that mysterious capacity for the productive and seemingly effortless pursuit of ideas wherever they take you. Sometimes that's just sitting around, letting your mind go on something, but you need to focus before then so that your mind is kind of primed to follow that. Goldberg also refers to what he calls an iconoclastic frame of mind. You're driven by a sense of dissatisfaction with what's available, with the intellectual status quo. Maybe you also have a romance with central societal and cultural themes. And that's because if a society isn't ready to accept your work, it won't. Society also has to be open to innovation and creativity, or they will just shut you down. Here are the 5 steps that creative processes follow according to Csikszentmihalyi. 1, preparation is getting yourself immersed in something that makes you curious. 2 is incubation, just letting the ideas churn around in your head. 3 is insight, you kind of get that eureka moment. But then 4 is evaluation, where you decide whether that eureka moment is actually worth following up on. And then elaboration, actually doing the work, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Thomas Edison talked about, this is the 99% perspiration. And now this from the great Brian Eno. Anyone who's had children will know that the urge to create, to make something from nothing, is innate. You can't stop kids from doing it. They're perpetually inventing. And that's the glory of doing creative work as an adult too. So let's talk prescription. We'll start first with a little wander off the path, combining work and flow. Goldberg says that shutting off conscious thought can be useful, but only in a specific way. By shutting off conscious thought, I mean what he calls mental wandering, or hypofrontal mental wandering. If that sounds vaguely familiar, it's because a couple of thousand words ago, we referred to flow state as transient hypofrontality. But Goldberg argues that mental wandering is good for filling in the gaps. After a solid, deliberate attempt at solving problems, we already know that silence, and sleep in particular, gives our brains the room to process what we've learned. This is an extension of that. If you just can't solve a problem, stop thinking about it for a few. Let your mind wander, the answer may come to you. Csikszentmihalyi offers a few suggestions for enhancing your own personal creativity. Foster curiosity and interest, just learn new things. Cultivate flow, form good habits. form different personality traits, such as introversion versus extroversion or optimism versus pessimism. Just play with being different from who you usually are. Go find problems. Creative people, he writes, are constantly surprised. Choose a specialization. Don't get stuck in it, but choose a path and see the process. You decide if you're going to do that work in physics or in architecture or in sculpture. You pick the specialization you're going to work in, and maybe it's a combination of several, but unless you're excellent in a thing, in a genre, you're going to suffer from the creative part of it. Nancy Andreessen offers some tips as well, and I think her tips are a little less, that they're less high-minded. They're actually achievable on a day-to-day basis, and I think they come across as easier to accomplish. First, choose a new and unfamiliar area of knowledge and explore it in depth. That's the curiosity we've been talking about, right? Meditate every day or spend time just thinking. I can say as of this recording, I've meditated every day, 10 or 15 minutes for almost 4 months now, every day. I use the Oak app for iPhone, but there are plenty out there. And I have been able to come up with ideas and remember stuff and just be more focused in my work and life in general. Practice observing and describing and imagining. Just practice the work you want to do. Turn off the TV. Read with your kids. And if you have kids, you might notice that when you read, they take in more than the story. They take in more than the words. They take in the pictures, but they take in the whole thing. You know, I can see my baby's eyes go to the parts of the page that I'm pointing at, but then they also cover the whole page, and she checks back in with me, with my face, to see what I'm looking at when we read together. Emphasize diversity in experiences. So change the channel, right? You know, if you always go to the same place for lunch, go pick a different type of food. If you usually go walking in the park, go to the woods. You know, go just try something different. Ask interesting questions. Here, try this. The next time you meet somebody, rather than asking them what they do, ask them what excites them. Ask them what they're scared of right now. Like, let that be the introductory question. Go outside. It's so easy to get stuck in front of our computers, in front of our phones, in our air conditioning. And then her last prescription is listen to music. And I don't know about you, but I find this a lot. If I listen to audiobooks and podcasts, eventually I just start feeling overeducated. I mean, like there's so much information coming in that it doesn't sink in anymore. And if you take some time and just listen to some music every day, even just a few songs a day, I find it really kicks in. I like what she says. So there you go. Get to work. Create something awesome. Be who you are. Do what you will to be. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Get show notes and more at betterhumanhood.com. Leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And have yourself a wonderful day.